So really quickly, who are you? What do you do? And what's been your journey so far in maybe 1 minute?
All right, I'll give you the quick version on this. I run a company called Avasta Incorporated. What are we doing at Avasta? Well, the name of the company means to discover. And what I've gone and done is from day one, we've gone and integrated mathematics into the work that we do. We're heavily biased around going and making our expertise available. So I've been a proponent of writing open and public standards for more than half a decade in my life. I've been an academic lecturing a couple of times a year for a semester at the graduate level, essentially trying to go and get brand managers and agency people to be able to understand brands from a measured point of view and go and really shatter the myth that brands are not measurable. And in the process, what we have become as a company in the past 17 months now is I've realized that we are an expertise amplifier. We go and take our clients and make them even better at what they are. They're able to understand their customers better. That gives them a competitive advantage. If we're involved in transactions, we're able to go and prepare them better for being able to sell themselves. If they're trying to make an acquisition, we're able to go and help them identify where the synergy is so they don't just pay for the acquisition and wait for it to go and make money. But if I buy it and I inject cash into it, where should I go and inject that money so that I'm able to leverage an even higher return than what I went and paid as a premium for the company in the first place? So it's this interesting relationship that's there. And I keep getting pulled more and more into expert witness work in terms of helping to resolve court disputes, being able to go and ascribe a value to a lot of intangibles. And for me, it's just exciting to be able to pass on the knowledge that I have and in the process, go and see what either former students or former clients have been able to go and do with their own business and be successful.
That's great. And on that note, that's why I'm talking to you, because I view you as one of the sort of experts worldwide about this. And so thanks for coming on the show, Edgar. I forgot to say, how are you? But how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. I'm doing
Sweet.
well.
Great. So, first question, I know you probably get asked this a lot, but what is a brand? How would you describe it to someone really simply?
You started with the loaded question right off the bat. So I'm going to go and give you the question that many people don't like hearing as the answer. The brand is what the brand consumer goes and makes it. And then you, as the brand seller, right, the seller of that underlying service or product, you now have to be responsible for what it has become in the marketplace. The era of artificially going and creating brands and having people consume them as you intended them to be consumed is over. So that would be my take on it. So a lot of the measurement that we go and do is to go and identify from the customer's perspective, right? Not just one who's already buying your products or services, but from, call it the customer with a capital C. Does brand even matter in your category? And you might have a percentage of the marketplace, they couldn't really care what your brand is, what your promise is, what your mission is, what your vision is. Were you involved in the in the most recent economic scandal and how you went and recovered from it, or were you affiliated with somebody politically? There's just a bunch of people, they don't care. But for the ones that do care, all of a sudden it's really material, and there isn't one brand in the marketplace. And the part that I really had to go and eat my words on last year, 9 months after starting Avasta and teaching dozens of students on how to go and implement the brand evaluation guide from the ISO that we've been developing. Sorry, the standard from the ISO that we've been developing a guide for. I had to eat my words because I'm like, there isn't a most representative description of the brand in the marketplace because it's almost impossible to even find a majority representation of it. So you got to go and add up all the little pieces and try and serve those groups to the best of your ability. And some groups are either rich enough that you can afford to target them specifically, and not that it's just like the wealthiest people in the world, but I mean like they're rich enough in that they're giving you a large chunk of their wallet to your brand, not just in the offering that you provide, but in their whole disposable income or attributable income to it, and go from there. So what is a brand today? It sits in the hearts and minds of people, but you have to go and measure what the best representation is in the public at large.
Okay.
And that is challenging, but it is doable, and it requires thought. It's not simple to do it, but the answer is simple when you finish it.
So does a brand consist of like basic components that you can name, like if you wanted to dumb it down?
So if I go and take a look at it, so here's some things that I would go and say to take a look at. So a brand is not a trademark, yet the trademark is necessary to have as a shorthand to trigger those memories, those affiliations that are there. Great example of it would be like the Nike trademark. Like they don't need to have the Nike name with it. They've gone and become so synonymous with their swoosh, or even with just the tagline, just do it, that you're able to go and get it across. So in that situation, you need to be able to go and have something that's relatable. So it either needs to be a logo, it needs to be a name, it needs to be some kind of a manifestation of you in the marketplace. A great example in the ultra luxury goods space is there's some luxury manufacturers, they don't even put their brand on the product. The product is the brand. And then if you go and take a look at in the car space, you don't need to see the Ferrari logo to see that it's a Ferrari. You don't need to know that it's a Porsche 911 to know that it's a Porsche 911. You don't need to get close to it and see that logo to confirm, oh yes, this is the Porsche version of that car that I like. So I think that part is very critical. I think because it's so unconscious, we sometimes forget the importance of it, because people will get turned away by negative representations or mixed or confusing representations of the visuals and the taglines that are there. So that's one. I think the second thing that is really critical is what's your association with your offering. So if you're not able to go and get that across, that's really critical. It's easy when you're going and selling one product that is very clearly to go and delineate from somebody else. But as you get into more and more complicated environments, how do you go and convey that offering? And what I'm noticing from the work that I've been doing with clients, from the business professionals taking my graduate course, doing it in their day-to-day life, applying the standard, is that you are having to become responsible for measuring the ecosystem that you've built, or the ecosystem that you're trying to encroach upon. And what I mean by that, you're trying to encroach upon, is there are very few brands, very few industries that are incremental new across everybody in society, meaning that as their purchasing power increases, they're going and collectively going and saying, oh, I got to go and buy this new thing, but I'll keep my spending the same on everything else that I was doing. It's almost non-existent today. So there's always some kind of a substitution effect that's going on. So you got to be clear, what are you here for? Are you trying to win wallet share of, like, I want to go and win wallet share on how much people are comfortable spending on takeout coffee every month? Okay, good. Well, you're a takeout coffee company, and you got to make that offering so clear that people just get as close to 100% of it coming to you. But what if you're more than a takeout coffee company? What if you're also selling booze, like Starbucks in some locations? You're also selling food. You're takeout, but you can do delivery. You can also go and buy the product in stores. So are you really Starbucks, the takeout company, or are you now Starbucks, the experience company? And what I think is happening with some organizations is that they get attached to the brand as they designed it, and then they have customers who go and consume it not as it's intended design.
This kind of
and they're
reminds
not
me.
responsible for it.
Sorry, just interrupt there. That kind of reminds me of the discussion going with like Tesla, whose market cap is skyrocketing, and they're like, "We're not a car company." Then other people are like, "Oh, they're a battery company," and then Tesla themselves probably don't think of themselves as either. So, is that what you're referring to?
Tesla is a great example of seeing it happen in real time, in terms of what's there, and it's a fascinating story because its valuation versus all the other car companies in the world, right? It's now worth more than any other car company in the world, unless, of course, it might have been very volatile the past 48 hours since I last looked at the stock price. But let's assume that it is the most valuable car company in the world. So what its value there is predicated on the promise of a future. And I think what is going and happening with brands today that are effective today is that they've captured what is the promise that their customer base are living into. So there's a collection of people who've gone and talked about a brand as a promise, a brand as a promise consistently met, brand
Joining
as
a tribe,
join the tribe, and I think they all have degrees of truth to them. But when you go and take a look at brands, that truth only applies to the segment of the marketplace where brand actually is relevant to that audience. So I really got, if I went and put like a first warning to all people who are involved with brands, whether you're a founder of a company or you're the CMO or the head of brand or a brand manager, the entire marketplace is not your customer. The first thing that I encourage everybody that I work with to do is, who are you not selling to? And they're like, what? Like, oh, well, we haven't been able to sell to this. No, no, no. Who do you not want to sell to? Who do you not want to buy your products and services? And that is, I think, not asked enough, because it's going to go and dictate what the brand is in the marketplace for you.
Well, it's funny, if you don't mind me interjecting. One of our earlier conversations was about how brands are defining their own categories, and the direct competitors that they believe they're competing with is often very far removed from the truth and how customers view their category, and customers don't really view categories. So it was interesting to hear your talk on that. Is that kind of what you're referring to here?
So I missed much of what you went and said there, but I think you were kind of getting into the conversation of brand as ecosystems.
Well, categories, like how brands define their category, and how sometimes a brand is competing outside of
Correct.
what the sort of orthodoxy thinking is within that sort of group of competitors.
So that's a great example. So let's go back to the Tesla as a great example, right? So they essentially went and did what had been attempted for since the dawn of vehicles in the 1880s, which is to go and have an electric car. The difference is that they went and made good-looking electric cars, but they didn't try and go and make an existing car electric. Instead, if you really think about why people love Teslas, it's not they're like, oh my gosh, this car is so amazing, it doesn't use gasoline. They go and rave about the fact that the inside of it is modern. The ability to drive it is completely different. The interface inside it. So if you go and actually take a look at what is giving their premium and their differentiation, is all the stuff that is not a better version of the status quo. There's something unique to the experience. There's something different about it. And I think that's the piece that's going and missing. I did work with a brand last year that was going to get retired after an acquisition. And, what did we go and discover that was, giving them a premium, not a price premium, but a consumption premium from their very loyal customer base, was that the customers felt comfortable going to their locations and regularly buying their goods and services. And you're like, well, of course that makes sense.
How do you measure comfort?
Yeah, well, what was driving the comfort? What was driving the comfort was I went there shopping in April, and John was there. And, John remembered me because I was there 3 weeks earlier making a purchase. And then I'd show up, 2 months later, I went traveling and I came back and, oh my gosh, hey, look, it's John and it's Elaine over there. It's like, oh, hey, Elaine, it's been a while. How is it? And how were they going and facilitating that there was a continuity between the people who worked at their locations and the customers who were coming in? Because they owned all their locations. They were going and providing a consistent training regimen, and it wasn't even conscious. Mm-hmm. It was from the previous regime that sold their company to this larger buyer. And they were going to shut the whole thing down and license all of the locations. And all of their competitors were running licensed locations. So all the staff were transient. They were just turned over all the time. There was no skin in the game for the people. The staff was getting paid more. They'd been trained better. And you had that comfort and continuity. And it's in an industry where experience makes or breaks your next purchase. I had the same thing happening in work that one of my students did with a prominent retailer that was international. We were able to go and identify, well, not me, but the student with the guidance from the course was able to identify that when they couldn't apply it in a 12-week course for the whole global organization, but they did have this interesting dynamic that they had 2 locations that, based on their internal model, should have run about the same profitability. Yet one was way more profitable than the other. And so they said, okay, we're going to go and test those 2 locations. We're going to apply the brand evaluation model. We're going to build one brand evaluation model for each location. And we're going to geo-fence it with the customers that are there. And what did they go and discover? In one location, they had way lower turnover. So the customers kept coming back to that location over going to other locations that may have been more convenient. So that one location was actually cannibalizing from the rest of their retail network because they had more favorable employee interactions.
Wow. So that's
Didn't
like a
show up anywhere. Didn't show up anywhere in their operating model. And then people are like, "Well, that's not brand. That's your staff." I'm like, "Yeah, that's your staff expressing the brand as your customers want it because the customers are looking for, hey, it's John. John knows what I like buying every morning, and I just need to show up and open the door, and they're like, hey, I got you, and they're already writing out your order for you, and you just show up and they're like, oh, we've already figured out how much it's going to cost. Like those moments of time, the fact that you're recognized as somebody of value, and not because you have a loyalty card or because you pay a price premium, but because they went and saved you time. They recognized you. And here's the problem with it. People are like, oh, give me some brand tips that I can go and use. Those two case studies probably don't apply to 80% of other brands because they don't have the same revenue interaction with the customer base. So understand your revenue interaction and go and determine what makes the brand in that. Are you experience driven? Go and put your bias towards providing great experiences. Are you driven by the fact that your stuff never breaks or never has a problem? Boy, you got to make sure that you never cut corners, right? Because the minute you cut corners, it's not going to be a 3% reduction in your revenue. It's going to be a 30% reduction in your revenue, and that part goes there hand in hand all the time.
perhaps Apple's struggling with that right now. Yeah.
I think it's an interesting thing. There's I'm talking to you from a new device from Apple that I went and bought, and it's the first time in 5.5 years that I went and bought a new MacBook. And I must admit, it was insanely easy and straightforward to go and migrate to the new environment. And I remember some of the features that I went and looking at the specs. I'm like, oh, would I have paid a couple of $100 less to not have this thing? And I got to admit, their integration is damn good. But what did I like the most? I did not have to rebuild my interface. What my body language was already used to. I literally just got a better screen, a better keyboard, more hard drive space, and a faster processor. But what my brain and my body was used to was there. Now, if they go and mess with me in 5 years' time, I'm probably going to go and struggle with it. But if kind of some of the things that have gone and made it for me are there, it's there. So kind of my last personal point that I kind of want to go and put in what makes a brand is that the brand is unconscious. You have succeeded with a brand when your customers don't have to think about what they're consuming. Their natural response is that the category affiliation is with your brand, not with your offer. And there's a lot of subtlety in there because a lot of businesses are in the business of developing offers, not building brands. And what I would go and say is you've done it right when your offer is the brand and your brand is the offer, and they're synonymous. And trust me, your customer base is smart enough to know they have alternatives.
Yeah.
They're just going to wait for you to screw up before they look at the alternatives.
So I suppose on the flip side, what isn't a brand? Like, what do people confuse a brand with?
Oh, I really think that they go and confuse it, that placing a logo on something that's somewhat similar or generally identical is what's going to go and give the brand benefit. I think we're going and seeing it right now a lot with a lot of the legacy CPG firms, where the underlying product isn't really dramatically different from, call it the house brand or the store brand that is being developed, and the customer base is just becoming smarter. Like, keep in mind, right? Like, what was the function of branding decades ago? The function of branding was a consistency. It was a way of going and conveying quality. If you go back to what brands were for, they were to go and convey quality. I go and buy this thing that has been branded, by John, the shoemaker. I know that this shoe, which looks really similar to Harry the shoemaker's shoe, because they're all using the same standardized template for shoemaking, but there's just something about John's that are better. And if I see that it's stamped by John, I might even be able to sell it to somebody else for a few pence a few years down the road when I no longer want to wear them. And that has pivoted. That has really gone and pivoted to, in today's environment, that is no longer the case. It's now become a table stake. That quality just should be there. And people will, I think, will have, like, we're like elephants. We have very long memories about bad things that affected us personally. Not so good on the most recent good experience that we had, unless it solved a really bad one.
Okay, so I just want to interject there because you mentioned quality becoming table stakes as like a benchmark. Like if you're not offering high quality, then you just don't even get considered anyway. But then, you know, there's this discussion in the branding community about purpose and having a story, and like that was the buzzword of the last 5 years. You know, where is it going now? Then, how are brands competing?
So I think because brands are no longer differentiators on consumption, but I kind of go back to the conversation around the ecosystem. And a great example of an organization that is experiencing called the conflicts of this right now is Facebook. So Facebook doesn't just have a brand for a place where you go and put your time for social media. Facebook is also very much a brand where some of the top talent in the world wants to go and work.
Mm-hmm.
So now you go and have two different elements that are there. You have the brand as an acquirer or a facilitator of talent. And I'll tell you this, for Facebook, it is a lot less expensive for them to go and hire top talent than somebody who's not Facebook or is not another hot brand. I was working with an organization where I found out that, they were not a sexy organization to work for. Part of the kind of like association with it, but it was a very kind of bland meat and potatoes sector of the economy if you went and asked the average person.
Uh-huh.
And if memory serves me, I think they had to go and pay half a year's executive salary, if not a year's executive salary, in acquisition costs, like not even just paying it as a bonus to bring them, like to go and find people and convince them. And then they had to pay them a premium for call it a Wall Street job or a London job or a Sydney job or a Toronto job at another prominent company of similar size, right? So it's just people didn't know to go and work there, and their comfort was, well, we'll pay you more for the same experience as a place that you want to go to. So going back to the Facebook example, you now have the dilemma of, well, how do they go and make their money? Well, they go and make their money because you went and spent a lot of your time on it. A lot of your time on it is worth advertising dollars for advertisers who go and integrate things into your feed. And, based on some of the things that are going on in the United States today, there's a lot of employees that are going and saying, I don't agree with what, we allow you to go into your feed, and they're being public about it. So in the moment, is it going and costing Facebook billions of dollars? God, no. But it's started to be chipped at. And if it's not addressed, then that next generation of people that want to go and work at Facebook, maybe they're going to go and take an offer from somebody else. And guess what? Facebook may, I'm not saying it will, but they may go and start experiencing the exact same thing that they did with Apple, with Google, with Amazon to Wall Street, where all of a sudden the top talent, regardless of discipline, was starting to go to them. And they're going and doing it with the top end CPG firms that used to get some of the top MBA talent or some of the top marketing talent. And all of a sudden they would just go to Facebook and their similar companies. If Facebook starts losing that talent and that drive and that mission and those values, that's where you're going to go and get there. So mission, vision, values, those are not for your consumers. Those are really for going and getting the talent that you want to be working for your brand and making those offerings out there in the world. If you have to worry about turnover or losing some of your top talent, that's a problem. So
with that said, doesn't the people you hire then project the brand that sometimes the customers will notice, especially in service delivery anyway? So isn't it indirectly part of the brand on the consumer perception side?
It totally is. I remember getting on a plane years ago, and sitting beside me and my wife was another couple, and I noticed that, and like the guy was like shorts, golf shirt, clearly going on vacation like we were. But for some reason, he had still gone and put on the pin of the financial institution that he was working for. So, strike up the conversation, we're on the same age, etc. And, very quickly it goes to, hey, so can I ask you, who do you bank with, Edgar? And I'm like, well, this is a bit of a surprise because I know who he works for, or he is a really big fan otherwise, right? And his wife's like, God, no, don't, like, we're on vacation. Don't start this again, right? And he's like, no, I really want to know. So we get into this conversation as to who I bank with, like, have I banked with his bank before? And like, the guy's just like a total advocate, right? He's like, he's just totally in love with it, etc. And this was a financial institution which was very bright, doing a lot of stuff, a lot of modernizing. They were the risk takers, but they were doing it well in their industry and really differentiating versus their peers. Fast forward 12 to 15 years, they do not have that same shine to them. They kind of lost it. And, can you pinpoint to one reason? Not really. Can you pinpoint to one reason why they were shining back then? Not really. But was it being expressed by their staff? Heck yeah. Are there staff today that I know from that financial institution that are very enthusiastic and love working there? Yes. Have they had a turnover that is 6 times higher than when I had that person sit next to me on the plane? Yes. So clearly, it is not cohesive. Clearly, there's changes. They're not just generational shifts. There's actually an exiting of people who loved building out that financial institution in the marketplace. So these are things that there are to go and take a look at. And I think if you're a business leader today, if you're not taking into your account your brand as a holistic asset that integrates how your offering gets to the market. How does your offering get to the market? It gets there through your employees. If you're going and selling it through middlemen like retailers or distributors, well, you sure as heck want to make sure that those people are on brand, because otherwise you're going to go and have a United Airlines moment. What happened with United Airlines? Legally, it wasn't United Airlines who went and took the person off the plane. It was a legal subsidiary. No, it wasn't a legal subsidiary. It was an independent legal company licensing United Airlines identity and sub-licensing the routes that United had rights to. So if you go and look at it, it was the United brand, but delivered by XYZ Corp and their staff. So there was actually no liability on the part of United, but the marketplace didn't go and care. They're not going and saying, it's really too bad for United that these guys were such bad licensees of the brand, because, I love United and I'm so sorry, and you can guarantee that my money's going to be there for you. And like, God, no, they don't have the attention pan to go and figure that out, and that's your delivery mechanism going and screwing up for you, and that's where that's where it is, because you as a customer, you don't have the attention span or the legal knowledge or the accounting knowledge or oh my gosh, like, so this thing's actually registered in Luxembourg, and then the money, really, the Caymans, oh God, I got to get my mother on this conversation. Did you know, Mom, that that this brand that we thought was this one cohesive thing, regardless of where we bought it, is actually like 75 different legal entities? Like, that's not the case at all.
Hey, so you bring up a good point here. You kind of touched on a bit about biases in the decision-making process of how businesses and internal staff manage and view their brand. I mean, you're talking about some legacy things that may not be applicable now, especially in CPG, which I've noticed as well. What are the sort of main legacy things or biases that you see happening?
Bias. That is the biggest thing. So
from a perspective, like from an internal versus customer perspective?
Oh yeah, it is the number one problem inside organizations today. If I go and take a look at all of the work that has been done in my graduate teachings on applying the brand evaluation standard, I'll take case in point. One of the semesters, 24 students completed the work inside their organizations or with an organization that they were affiliated with. 2 of them were able to get to final delivery with buy-in from everybody inside their organization. A prominent global company that shall remain nameless but has had certain high-profile negative experiences. So I think there's enough of companies there where you can start kind of guessing. Their legal department shut the whole thing down. We're not going to have you go and get in touch with our customers to find out what they think about our brand. And it's like, excuse me? I'm the brand manager, and I'm trying to go and understand if the advertising work that we do, the marketing work that we do, the sponsorship work that we do plays a different role in our customers' experience. And like, no, we're not comfortable with this. It's like, so legal goes and shuts down the company from actually being able to engage with their own customers to see, are we delivering the experience that you're wanting to? Because, by the way, we're in the news a lot for a lot of negatives. Is the things that we're doing to try and address these negatives actually working or not? Or are we just shooting in the dark? So that was the frustrating experience for that one, right? And then the one that was the most predominant answer was, oh, I don't believe these results. It's like, what? What do you mean you don't believe in these results? Like, did you go and have some kind of your own personal ethos document that says if the results aren't this way, you're just not going to go and take them? Like, this is financial results from inside your business. This is statistically
There is a perfect cartoon that sums this up that Tom Fishburne does called The Marketunist. And there's these board members,
Yes.
someone presenting, there's board members sitting around a board table, and someone's presenting like obviously there's two choices here, and there's a bar graph, and number A is like the obvious choice. And then the,
Yeah.
the person at the board table goes, well, my expert advice is going to disagree with that, or something like to that tune. And
Yeah.
it's hilarious. So
Yeah,
you're talking about
you
that.
totally nailed it. You totally nailed it. And I think this is the problem that's going on. And like, I have these students and I'm looking at their stuff and like, these are brand professionals. These are people who've gone and worked 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years in their respective space. Some of them are managing multiple brands because they're working at an agency and they're taking this course and trying to make a difference for their clients. And it's like, you don't believe it. And it's like, yeah, well, so I just haven't seen it. And I'm like, what? Like, how can this be the case? And I think that's one of the curses that is there. And if you as an organization are really kind of stuck on this, it's a problem. And kind of, again, on that bias point, I'll really go and give you an example that was just really went and hit me on this. So one of the students, a brilliant young woman, having a lot of responsibility inside the organization that they were working for, and this is in the financial services space. In that financial services space, they went and decided that they were going to come out with a product that specifically was towards a segment of the female population. And they viewed it as a proactive thing that they were going to go and do. It's like, hey, we have actually gone and seen that you consume our category from a different way. We've heard you. You've asked for a different way to be served. Like, it sounds like totally on brand, right? Hey, I have a significant share of the marketplace. They feel like the general services we're providing as a financial institution aren't doing it. And here we are, we're going to go and do it for you. So here we go. We've launched this new sub-brand. You get to go and have the services your way. Sounds like it should work, right? Until you then go and realize that there was a lot of patriarchal messaging that was coming out. So that wasn't on brand. And then the other problem about it is you haven't gone and acknowledged that you went and ignored us as a gender for decades. And that is actually an important part to go and do, because your master brand is not associated with what this new promise is. In fact, we're not seeing it anywhere else. So it's almost like a lip service of going and doing this. So these are challenging questions, especially for legacy brands. And my current hypothesis is the reason why so many legacy brands are struggling is because they've accrued too many negative associations in the marketplace that are not reflected in their financial reporting. And the brand evaluation standard calls for doing that work. And I was working with I was not with a financial institution. I was working with an institution last year who we went and discovered that certain legal challenges that the organization had experienced in previous years, that from an accounting point of view had been resolved, had not been resolved from the perspective of the market. It's like, well, but you had a class action lawsuit. You guys went and paid out millions of dollars. I was in that lawsuit. My cousin was in that lawsuit. And but they've moved on as the leadership. It's like, well, hold on. Like, you have upset people, right? And heaven forbid that they had come out with an offering that was kind of like very closely associated with what they got sued for in the first place. So that's kind of the dilemma that I think is there for organizations. And measure it. If you're not measuring it, you don't actually know what you're managing.
Okay, that's one of my later questions. So hold that thought. Hang on,
Okay.
I've got an internet unstable thing again. Okay, we're back. Who are the people in control of the brand in the organization? And I know this is open-ended, and I've done that for a reason.
I don't think anybody is in control of it. I think somebody needs to be responsible for leading the charge and understanding how the brand is viewed in its components versus as a collective, right? Like, your brand is not a tagline. It is not your 5 key principles. It is much more complex than that. And then I would say there needs to be a brand champion who goes and measures it. What is it out there? What is it inside? And then what's the discrepancy between the two? Some of the most valuable work that we've gone and had our clients share with us is when we've applied the standard and had them go and take a look at internal stakeholders and what they think makes the brand purchased in the marketplace, and then looked at what the actual marketplace went and said was the varied reasons for why they went and bought it, frequently was extremely different.
Mm-hmm.
And we did work earlier this year where with an organization where the leadership and the licensees actually weren't aligned on the overall objectives of the business. And when you looked at the compensation model of the licensees versus the compensation model of the parent company, it totally made sense as to why they would be, in some cases, aligned and in most cases, not aligned on the business objectives of the brand as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. So we're touching on valuation here, which is something that obviously is your core specialty. And I really want to know, like, how valuable is a brand proportionally to the organization? Because we're talking about an intangible asset here. So
Yeah,
you've done a lot of measurement around this, proportionally, do you find it, obviously it would probably vary from company to company, but is it becoming more valuable or less valuable?
there's two schools of thoughts that are coming out on this thing. The brand, in terms of its, call it, isolation towards the traditional legal treatment or financial treatment as a logo or as a trademark or as a marketing asset, that is declining in value. But what we're seeing is the system that the brand is dependent on is increasing the value. And if you remove the brand from the system in many cases disintegrates. It loses its value, very much so. I'm privy to an organization that went and did a very robust assessment of their brand, and they went and discovered that their trademarks were really not worth very much on their own if it didn't come associated with the long-term contracts that were there with the country rights, or the retailer rights that they were selling through. So I could go and sell you my trademark, which is quote unquote the brand, though from an accounting point of view, there is no such thing as a brand, by the way. This is very important. This is one of the big problems that we have. There is no such thing as a brand in either US GAAP or under IFRS, which is the international accounting standard. There is no such thing. It's used as a shorthand by the auditors. Like, we'll call this indefinite lived intangible a brand for convenience. But there's no actual such thing as a brand, which might explain some aspects of the CFO organization who may be trapped into thinking that there isn't one, but I don't want to presume for that. So going back to the example, they went and realized that, if we sell the brand and the buyer doesn't get the rights to the distribution network, then the brand loses a lot of its value because the distribution network has value. Well, how did that distribution network have value? Well, because those retailers and those distributors want to be able to sell my brand. Oh, okay, good. So why do they want to be able to sell my brand in exchange for which they gave multi-year contracts? Oh, they want to be able to sell my brand because I'm reliably able to go and make my product available with those brands and trademarks and logos and taglines, etc., to them. And how am I able to do that? Oh, well, because I have gone and set up a really fail-safe production environment where I'm not dependent on one location to go and manufacture my goods. I can, I've decentralized it. I can, if there's a breakdown in one plant, I can go and manufacture it in another one very quickly. So, my retail customers and my distributors who, their livelihood is partially dependent on selling my brand, they're there. So if I'm not selling that system to the buyer, can the buyer easily go and replicate my manufacturing environment? Well, the answer is no. Okay, so the brand is now worth even less. And as a result, the infrastructure on its own is worth a lot less too, because that infrastructure was really set up for these brands to be sold to the distributors and the retailers so that they could go and get to the consumers. It's like, okay, well, why did you go and set up this manufacturing ability in the first place and set up all these distributors and et cetera? Well, it's because we have all these consumers that really like consuming these brands. It's like, oh, so if this brand is not available to be consumed the way that our customer base expects to be able to consume them, then the brand is actually not worth that much. That is correct. Okay, so what you've gone and told me is, Go
Sorry,
ahead.
just to interject here. So, just in summary, you're saying a brand is a collection of parts, but those collection of parts can't always be separated from one another.
Yeah, and that's one of the big part is they're not separable. So the best way to describe that situation is 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 equals 40.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. So you were talking about like
And that is a very difficult note because it's the net. You have to calculate the network effect of what allows the brand to generate the revenue in the first place. It is not separable, and this is where I have a lot of issues with how our accounting standards around brands and intangibles are. They go and call for separability, and this is why the stuff that you can't separate gets rolled into goodwill, and you get convoluted values ascribed to goodwill that is there. And if you know, my personal professional take is, if you are the CEO or the CFO of your company, you should not have a goodwill line item for your internal corporate valuation model. If you do, you're putting your business and your shareholders at risk.
Okay, I think this is really interesting because I mean, from an accounting perspective, I wouldn't call myself an accountant, but I need to know the elementary side of it. You know, you are looking at things independent from one another, cost centers. You know, on the ledger, that's the way people view businesses and how you value them. So it doesn't always account for those that synergistic effect between those components, does it?
It does not. So, and the brand evaluation standard, the call it the unexpected outcome of it is that by building the framework as the standard calls for it, you are now able to start measuring the system effects, which you would not be able to do using a traditional accounting approach. So you have a systematized approach that allows you to calculate the network benefit or the network hindrance, because it will also show you the compound effect of the negatives in your organization as well
Yeah.
that are
Hey,
associated with your brand.
I think this is really thing that I really want to ask you because there's this graph going around on social media, and you know, the proportion of companies back in the past that used to have a proportion of intangible and tangible assets, and over
Mm-hmm.
time it sort of goes up and to the right, and obviously tangible assets, you know, decrease or stay the same, and intangibles just go through the roof. So you know, in effect, that is saying, hey, intangible parts of business is the most value. In fact, like the majority of value of modern businesses. So do you see current governance and executives viewing it from that perspective, and even the finance organizations themselves who are valuing these companies, or do you think there's a lot of legacy? I call them the tangible generation, you know, who need to have things printed down on paper and see it, and sometimes can't get their head around the crux of intangible value.
The short answer is that too many are stuck in the past. I published something last year where we went and did an inflation adjusted calculation of the component value of the S&P 500. So the Standard & Poor's 500, call it most valuable companies in America. And what we went and discovered was that in real dollars, so adjusted for inflation, tangible assets have declined as a share of business value in absolute in real terms from where they were in the 1980s. So if you went and had, you know, $1 million worth of tangible assets in the 1980s to go and drive your business, you were able to get to the same business performance with only $900,000 in tangible asset value in 1980s dollars.
Wow.
So we've become much more efficient at using our tangible assets. But because we've had inflation, the dollar amounts that we see looks like these tangible assets are worth, you know, like $4 million. But if you look at it from an inflation adjusted point of view, they're actually worth less than $1 million compared to today. So we're trapped in not doing our own business assessments in reality. And it's a problem also for brand management because, especially, again, going back to the longevity question, you know, great example is some conversations with my wife. She's like, "Oh my God, this thing is so expensive. Like, I used to pay like $4 for this thing. Why does it now cost $7?" I'm like, "Honey, that thing cost $4 in the 1990s. Like, a dollar from the 1990s is not worth $1 today. It's worth about 68 cents, but we still call it $1. But from an inflation point of view, it's there. So maybe they're charging a bit more than they should have, but you know, if our dollar was worth 68 cents in 1999, we would have been going and paying, you know, $6 and change for this thing."
Yeah.
And she's like, "Oh, okay, if you put it that way." So we have our associations kind of trapped in there.
One thing I do want to explicitly mention, you touched on this before, was within the marketing advertising industry, there's these affiliated organizations, let's call them, that have been bought and sold. Kantar, Millward Brown, Brand Z, Interbrand, that value brands, and there's another one you formerly worked for, and they all value them a bit differently. Mm-hmm. And there's like a score of like what's the most valuable brand. You see this stuff go around on social media and in white papers and that kind of thing. Should we be listening to those organizations, or where do you think those brand measurement firms are sort of falling over with the new reality?
Here's my take as somebody who worked for a brand valuation firm and then who separately did academic research on brand valuation publications. They are collectively onto something in how much brand at its non-accounting and legal treatment plays a role. The problem is that they all kind of obfuscate what are they actually going and talking about in terms of brand value. So, brand finance as an organization is really going and taking a look at, well, if I tried to go and sell this brand, how much of a business benefit can that brand provide? So it's really kind of like, will the tax authorities recognize my ability to extract that value after the sale? Because if they don't, then I'm going to go and have operating damages to the business. So that's kind of like the brand finance take. And hello, David Haig, if you're watching this, we can have another conversation on this. If I go and take a look at Interbrand, they're going and taking a look at the realizable value of the brand if it was unhindered. And that's a different interpretation of it, right? It's like, well, look, if I didn't have to go and deal with all the competitor pressures and things like that, how much could my brand be worth? Like if I nailed it, right? We did good strategy, good investment, all of our dollars that we put behind the brand were efficient. How much could it be worth? And so it's a different application, same kind of concept called brand valuation, but you're directing it towards different purposes. Then you go and take a look at something like the European Brand Institute goes and publishes, and what they're going and taking a look at, well, my personal interpretation, and that they've been gracious to allow me to look under the hood in terms of their models and how it works, and they're going and looking at it, well, what's the impaired value of the brand? Like if you went and screwed the brand up, how much value would it go and lose? Okay, so we're going to add that lost value back to the business value. So if you had a $10 billion company and you screwed the brand up and it would be worth $4 billion to somebody without the brand, then it's like clearly the brand is adding $6 billion back to it. And that is a very business take on it, right? Like if you go and take a look at Hermes or LVMH or any of those luxury brands, if you go and have like a brand crisis for those brands, are their manufacturing plants or facilities really worth any more than 10 or 15 cents on the dollar? Probably not. So a lot of it is on that expectation of being able to do so. And then you go and take a look at kind of like the Millward Brown publications and how they're going and looking at it. And what they're going and saying is, look, if everything worked out and everybody had access to this brand, this is how much it would be worth. And this is something I only really kind of clued into the past 2 years, because I really struggled with when they would go and publish the brand being worth more than the entire enterprise value of the company. And it's like, well, they're going and saying, it was like, look, like, give it time, this brand is going to be worth a ton of money. And in some of the cases, not in all, but in some of the cases, they were more accurate than anybody else. Like brands really did grow into that value. The problem is that they didn't really convey it that way. So if you're looking at it from a sector point of view, it makes sense. If you're looking at it from a similar size of company point of view, it makes sense. But I struggle with what it has turned into, where there's a naturally strong bias that the most valuable brands in the world also happen to be tied to the most valuable businesses in the world in almost all circumstances. Mm-hmm. It's just like a natural result. So what I would personally be preferred is to know is which companies are the most brand dependent, like what percentage of their brand is predicated. What percentage of their business is predicated on their brand. Mm-hmm. That to me would be a much more interesting conversation that I can take an action on as a business leader, rather than going and getting into the trap, well, I'm never going to go and get $100 billion brand. My business is worth 100 million.
Hey, and that raised a good point about Peter Thiel, what he says about startup community, or businesses in general. He makes this a blanket statement that, hey, just don't worry about your brand until you hit 50 mil ARR, right?
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that statement has premise, or do you think the businesses should be looking at their brand from the onset, but perhaps not investing as much internal resources on it than they would in the future?
So here's my counter argument to the fact that you shouldn't be concerned on that. How much of your marketplace did you burn down to the ground to hit your 50 million ARR? Because if you went and just removed participation, you got to that business growth because you just ignored your early customers, or you shipped bad product, or you gave bad experience, but the marketplace wasn't aware enough of the negatives. So essentially, you took advantage of your lack of awareness to go and take advantage in driving cash flow. It's going to come back to bite you in the butt.
Yeah.
So I think you need to be responsible in terms of how you get to that ARR. Because again, I'm going to go back to that. In the current fiscal year, you may not see it, but the accumulation from the past 5 years of trying to hit that number, you've gone and left a lot of upset people in the marketplace, and some of them will become advocates against you. So that would be my interpretation.
No, that's great. I mean, I've noticed some things about what you said anecdotally and my experience too. So that's really good. And that brings me to what I really want to ask you, which is, if I am a smaller business, let's just say private equity, or 1 mil rev a year up to the 50 mil sort of range, what things should I be concentrating on with my brand? Like in the media, it's the advertising industry wants to think that, hey, it's all about brand awareness, get more brand awareness, you'll be fine. And then academics like Byron Sharp talking about mental availability and physical availability with your brand, and he views it through those two lenses.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think that businesses should focus on, at least in those initial stages?
So I'm going to have to split the answer into two parts. The
Okay.
first part is, what's your ambition? So if your ambition is to kind of just maintain control of your little ecosystem, like you just want to go and have several chains of your restaurant in your city, or you want to go and have you ship good product to specialists, but you don't really have ambitions to go beyond that. In that situation, all of your focus needs to be in understanding what's the difference between the customers you've acquired, the customers you've lost, and the people who are interested in buying your products or services in the near term. That should become your number one priority. And you should be doing that if you're starting a business and you want to be able to figure out what will make people become my customers, and what would I have me lose them. Like, what do I need to avoid doing as a business? And that is how your brand is going to be built, on the backs of those customers. If you have an ambition to grow into a large, prominent organization, then one thing that I've kept coming back, and again, this is anecdotal, I haven't gone and done the academic research, and a lot of this is very hard to even go and do academically, but I keep noticing that in larger organizations, so mass consumer, mass enterprise, mass B2B, there's this weird efficiency ratio that seems to be at around 40% awareness penetration into your target audience. And if you're below 40, it is in almost all cases more efficient to your bottom line to invest into awareness before you start investing into differentiation. And if you're above 40, it becomes much more efficient in going and trying to identify those niches, call it the tribes, call it the pockets of the customer bases that coalesce around some sub combination of your brand features or offering. And then you really want to nurture those audience, have them feel like they're special and unique, and the general public awareness of what you have is really not that much of an advantage. Like, if you have a brand dashboard and your company's sitting at 85% awareness, and you're judging your marketing team on getting you to 86% awareness, you're totally barking up the wrong tree. But I would say at around 40% in terms of awareness in your kind of like target or the wallet that you're trying to win, that seems to be that inflection point where it starts becoming efficient in targeting niches or specialists.
Okay, that's really good. And look, there's a lot of diverging views in the branding industry, which you've mentioned quite eloquently. If I was seeking someone's advice in terms of my branding, brand strategist, maybe someone on the marketing side, or maybe someone like you more on the sort of financial valuation side of that, for you, what are the red flags with hiring someone like that? Like someone who maybe is quite junior and not as experienced as somebody else.
I would say the biggest red flag that I have is stock measures, where you just go and take like the top 10 brand metrics or the top 10 marketing metrics and you go and compare your performance to that. My biggest red flag inside that one is impressions, because I have yet to be able to go and have somebody go and show me their 186 million impressions happening.
Impressions, do you mean with advertising impressions or?
Yeah, I like go and show me 100 impressions. Like I don't even need to see the 186 million that you go and say that you went and achieved. Show me the 100. How many people was that to? Was it 10 impressions each to 10 people? Was it one impression to 100 people? And then, what happened? Like if you cannot go and show that one to me. So
well, the
I think
counter, I'll just interject though. The counter to impressions, then the fallback argument is, well, it's about reach. Here's our reach figures that we pulled from, 10 of our advertising suppliers and different systems and compile them all together. And hey, our reach metrics going through the roof. We've got brand awareness. Yay. What's the counter argument to that?
So the counter argument that I have to it is, okay, as you're getting reach, how is it going and showing up on inbound? If you're still having to go and try and acquire that revenue, that means that your brand is not working for you, no matter how much money you're pushing into the reach. So that's kind of my take on that part. Again, it's the stock approach to measuring the brand effect that I have the concern over. And it's also going and looking at it solely from the function point of view that my marketing is building the brand. I disagree with that statement. Your role of marketing is to go and express the brand using the marketing channel, just like your customer service people are there to express the brand using the interpersonal channel, just like your call center staff is there to express the brand using the call center channel. Look at the amount of telecoms that have gone and lost billions of dollars worth of customers because they had lousy call center experiences. Everything was fine until I went and tried to renegotiate my contract, right? So you got to really just go and figure out marketing is a function. It has a lot of money behind it. It is a tool, but it is not universal, right? You can go and build awareness without marketing. Tesla is a great example of it. Can everybody duplicate Tesla? God, no. If somebody comes and says, hey, I'm going to go and sell you a Elon Musk strategy for your brand for $1 million, you should be going and not even allowing them to finish a sentence because it's just not feasible. So you've got to, that would be my take on a lot of these different things.
That's great. I mean, I just had a discussion with a customer experience lady as well, who sort of explained how our profession is. It's all the touch points that the customer has over their lifetime, and that's how she views customer experience. And it's about, making sure that journey or those interactions are, as favorable as possible. So you're saying this sort of similar thing from a branding perspective, from what I'm understanding.
Yeah.
Are there like a top 3 list of things you're like, hey, don't go and do this? Don't think like this?
Yes. Here's my top 3. Do not go and build your brand positioning in a vacuum. Too much of it is, in North America, would be a term called inside baseball. I don't know what the Aussie equivalent of this would be, but it's essentially when you go and talk about the brand with yourself, amongst yourself, and you never actually go and take into account who's supposed to be the beneficiary in there. So if your customer is not part of the equation, that's a really big error that you're going and making. So that's one. The second, I think, big mistake that I'm going and that I notice people going and making is they miss the handoff. They inside the organization from the function of marketing, activating the brand, to the salesperson picking up the brand as the common identity, and then trying to get the revenue. That I'm very frequently seeing is a disconnect inside organizations where either the marketing is doing a bad job getting the brand idea across and the salespeople are very good with it and they're frustrated that there's not enough demand for their function, or it's the other way around where the marketing totally gets it. They're very good at knowing what their purpose is to get the brand across, and then the salespeople are just not picking up the baton being handed off to them in getting the sales done. So that would be the second big error. And I would have to say the third biggest one is, and this is an existential one, I think we're a bit early on this thinking, people need to be able to understand why they make money. If you're not measuring why you make money and reporting on why you make money, that is a really big error. All of the reporting platforms that I see show how I make money, where I make money, with who I make money, but nobody's measuring why I make money. And if you're not going and figuring out the why of your brand being purchased, you are going to go and make erroneous decisions. You're going to start allocating money based on where it is being purchased and where it's not being purchased. You're going to start allocating it based on how it is being purchased and how it's not being purchased. And that's not the answer. That's not the answer. You've got to figure out the why. And it kind of goes back to the first point. Is the customer with a capital C part of the equation?
So you sound like Simon Sinek now.
Partially. The thing with what I would say with Simon is I think my difference from him is, are you measuring it? Because he's
not just talking about it.
Philosophy. I'm going and saying like, well, you got to go and figure out how much it matters, because the problem is this: you're never going to have 100% of the and this is where I disagree with Simon on this. The way he speaks it, I don't think he necessarily means it, but the way it's perceived is that everybody in your target customer base operates that way. God knows. No, like take a look at Coca-Cola. They make the majority of their profits from less than 10% of their drinkers.
Yeah, that light buyer effect.
Yeah, right. And I think that's the part that you got to figure out. Like, why do you make money? Right. And and are the clues in how and where? Absolutely. But the why will differ. Why people buy your product in Australia is not the same as why they buy it in America or why they buy it in Canada or the United Kingdom. Are there going to be groups of people that buy for the same why? Absolutely. Yeah. But you don't make the assumption that you're seeing the same penetration that's there. I had an opportunity to work with a prominent global CPG firm a few years ago, and they couldn't understand why in their market penetration and brand development index in the United Kingdom was much lower than it was in America. And I'm like, because the Brits are not Americans? Like, they have a different competitive set in your category. Like, the alternative in the store is not the same. They don't shop at the same stores. They don't have the same practices. Like, you know, like some of the foods that were offered from the CPG were in the snack aisle in the United States, but were not in the snack aisle in the United Kingdom. They just didn't have the equivalence for it. It's like, so the why of, you know, the why of these people consuming this is really variable. And that's something to take a look at. And if I kind of go and put a really funny one into this, you know, how come Americans aren't going and eating Marmite or Vegemite?
Well, Tom Hanks did.
Why not? Well, Tom Hanks did, but I'm like there's 300 million of them. Like, what a market! Like, we should be pushing it out into the U.S., right? And you're like, oh God, like we spent $50 million trying to sell Marmite to Americans. Why is this not working? That's because you haven't figured out why they're not buying it. And or why they won't buy it in the first place. So
I actually know the answer to that. There's not enough sugar in it and too much salt.
I remember my first Marmite experience as a 17-year-old on a music exchange to the United Kingdom. I still remember it very clearly. And now I enjoy it, but back then I did not.
It's good to put in your cooking as well. So very interesting brand story behind that, actually. That's another whole topic for Vegemite. No, that's really good. So what's one of the funniest things or examples during your professional work life that you've come across? Like maybe something you thought would work that like was a spectacular fail that you can kind of laugh about now, or perhaps like a story from another competing firm that went like in the wrong direction. Anything funny?
It's definitely funny in hindsight, but in the moment, it was actually really material. I was working with an organization years ago, and what I didn't realize was that concurrent with our work, there was a prominent management consultancy that had been brought in to go and do some advisory work on this as well. And you know, our work was around trying to understand why the brand was making money and why the brand was not making money. And what we did is we followed the money. And the best way to kind of describe it is with an international organization, regional divisions, etc. But due to the industry that they were in, cross-border transactions were very difficult. And you know, post 9/11, you know, if you're making large purchases, it takes a long time to go and make payments. So they had customers all over the world, and those customers were also not small. So those customers also had subsidiaries in the United Kingdom, in Germany, in Brazil, in Canada, in the United States. And And when you looked at it from the management consulting point of view, the feedback that came back is you guys have dozens of offices around the world. Many of them are, you know, overstaffed versus the revenue that you're making. Some of them are losing money, and we believe that if you shut these offices down, you're, you know, after the one-time charge, which is beautiful from a, you know, public company point of view, you're going to be going and saving, you know, 8 digits a year, like a large 8 digits a year, which is going to go and add to your profitability, and that's going to improve your share price, and et cetera. And now we did not know that this work was happening. Okay, we go and follow the work, and we find out, we get this report the day before we present. And what did we go and find out in our work? Well, we went and found out that what was confusing to us is you have dozens of countries that you're in, yet 90% of your revenue from a legal point of view is recognized in 3 countries. But 60% of your revenue is sourced outside of those 3 countries. So what gives? Well, the deal is struck in Indonesia or in Argentina or in South Africa or in Dubai or in, I don't know, in Japan or Korea. But because of where they're able to go and facilitate the money, the payment, they just go and have the payment be issued from the funds that are already available in London, in Switzerland, in the United States. So from an accounting point of view, you have to go and recognize the revenue where it's registered. So the United States was heavily overstating its revenue versus the sales force originating that revenue. It just happened to be a mechanical, like a technicality in terms of where it was coming from. So if we had gone and followed the traditional operating point of view, we would have gone and said, it's like, oh, your American, British, and your Swiss brand value is like 99% of your business, and all these other countries are just worthless for you. But because we took a look at where the customer base was coming from, we were able to go and say, like, well, your brand is extremely strong in these segments of Asia. It doesn't show you in your subsidiaries, but it shows you in the fact that such a large percentage of your revenue in the United States is originated by transactions that have happened or been sourced from your Asian customers. So getting that relationship there is really funny. And like, the funny part for it is, you know, in hindsight, is like, oh my gosh, like it seems so simple. Like you're like, follow the money. But if you're following the costs, you're not following the revenues. We were following the revenues. They were following the costs. And we came to completely different conclusions.
So maybe it pays to be detail-oriented, right?
It's so critical. And I'll tell you this, at the same time, just our recommendation on its own would also have gone and been misleading. You got to go and take a look at it both sides. One of the things that I go and teach within my course is I go and talk about the danger of using single metrics to go and evaluate performance. So what I go and say is, you got to pair your metrics. There's no such thing as revenue. There's things that you sold that had a monetary value, right? You sold something. Like you go and say, oh, we had 10 million in revenue last year. It's like, yes. Well, did you sell 10 million things for $1 each? Did you sell one thing for $10 million? Or some combination in between? Because you got to figure out what's growing inside it. Because if you go and say that I now have a target of growing from 10 million in revenue to 12 million in revenue, I'm going to go and say, and what will have to happen in the business for you to get that extra 2 million in revenue? Great. Where will the customers come from to go and do that? Okay, you've identified where you think they'll come from. Why would they be coming? So I'm going to go back to what would have to happen that you can, with your customers, that you will generate 20% more revenue next year. Why would these people be buying you next year in addition to the ones that are already going and buying you? So that would be kind of my recommendation on here. Pair your metrics. Don't just take a look at revenue. Don't just take a look at cost when you're making brand and business decisions.
Hey, just speaking about that, I mean, that was maybe an avoidance of failure, but what's one of the most spectacular examples of like getting branding and brand valuations wrong that's like completely failed?
One that I was privy to, or one that I was one that I'd went and delivered.
Either or.
All right, I'll go and call one on myself.
Okay.
So uh, I was asked to go and do a brand value reconciliation for a financial institution a number of years ago, and in my initial conversations before I started going and taking a look at the numbers, I went and was caught in the crowd. They had some good advertising. Their CEO had gone and said some good things, etc. And I was like, yeah, good for you guys, etc. Right? And then we go and take a look at the numbers that were underneath. And what had happened is that the actual underlying performance of the brand and the business had declined year over year. But the reason why their brand value had gone up is because, we have to, in our brand value assessments, we have to go and account, well, how's the sector doing? So the sector as a whole had just gone up so much that it had offset in absolute terms the decline that the brand had experienced. So on a net effect, their brand value went up. So I was eating a lot of my own bile in that moment, because I had been saying, you've gone up. And it's like, no, what you really did is you managed to ride the coattails without falling off. In terms of going and increasing your value, and in terms of your fundamentals, you're actually in a dangerous situation versus a year ago. It's funny, just me even sharing this right now makes me still feel embarrassed and uncomfortable that was the case. And I'll tell you this, I definitely went to learn from it. I now will never go and commit to go by conjecture or by experience. I will actually want to go and take a look at what has gone and happened underneath.
It's those PR professionals that point everyone in the wrong direction, right?
Yeah. So that's what I would say, have to go and say has been
No,
one.
that's
And
great. So this is my last sort of formal question before I ask you a set of standards and more personal ones.
Sure.
Really interested to hear, and you've touched on this already, the future of brands and how you see it. You mentioned ecosystems and changing from quality as like a measure of the strength of a brand. Where we are now to where you see 5-10 years down the track, what do you think branding will be all about, and what are we going to be focusing on?
Some of the most successful brands, and I think a number of them don't exist yet, are going to be ones that will start anticipating and solving the pain points before we go and hit them. There's a few good examples of it right now. Not that it's universal, but Tesla has definitely gone and solved for a number of the pain points in terms of how a vehicle works. Really, their user interface and the features that they have inside their vehicle, some of them are just absolutely excellent. The comfort that is there about the fact that that your cameras are on in case something bad happens to your vehicle, and you can go and demonstrate to your insurance company that it wasn't your fault. That provides a real peace of mind, and no other car company went and had that, and they addressed the ecosystem, and the car is not there in isolation.
And also the bio weapon mode as well. So if you get nuked with nuclear fallout, or another mass pandemic happens, you can just push a button and the HEPA filters get rid of all that.
Are exactly going to go and kick in. So they've really consciously or unconsciously, and I will never go and attempt to say that I have any semblance of understanding of the inside of Elon Musk's mind. But what they've gone and created is that they've taken responsibility for the vehicle or their offering inside the ecosystem inside which their customer uses it. So that cross integration, those are going to be your successful companies. Another one that I really admire today is Stripe. They're not a consumer brand exactly, yet they're critical for the consumer experience. And what have they gone and done is that they've really gone and understood that there's an ecosystem problem, and they've gone and initially started with an extremely simple solution for what hadn't been solved for decades inside the payment space. And now they're worth tens of billions of dollars because they've gone and taken that ethos, and they've continued to go and say, okay, what's the next barrier we can break? What's the next barrier that we can break? What's the next, incrementally just go and reduce the things that will prevent a transaction from resolving. And that to me is so critical, because the brilliance to me, and again, I don't know if it's conscious or not, but no company ever goes and says, this is the revenue we didn't realize because we fucked up. oops, maybe I wasn't supposed to swear on this,
No, no,
but
no, no. That's great.
nobody
Swearing
goes,
is encouraged.
nobody goes and says, well, look, we had $150 million in revenue last year, but if we hadn't screwed up in all these different ways, we would have had 400 million in revenue. Like, where's the CFO or CEO who comes out and says that? And how many of them are even going and doing that assessment internally? Why? Because our accounting systems are not set up to go and show what didn't happen. They're only there for us to go and show what did happen.
So it's like
And
you're
that's
basically referring to like opportunity cost right now.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what Stripe went and tapped on, right? It was that restaurant who lost that sale because the customer wasn't able to pay, so they just left. And it was never going to go and show up on their financial statements. But all of a sudden, and why was the benefits of Stripe and that whole ecosystem, same thing with Square, why were they all successful? Because it was real. Like, you went and got cash in your account as a merchant, as a seller of goods and services immediately, and you could have that unconscious association of like, oh my gosh, before I would have, like, this would have been a problem in getting the payment facilitated.
Yeah.
So that whole thing is, I think, so critical in terms of being able to anticipate it. And I would say, if I'm gonna go and put a bit of a political bent on this, it's the ability to go and make, call it, things that have been regulated because they had to be regulated for the time, but those regulations have now become a crutch, but we don't know how to unregulate it without creating new problems. The organizations that are able to solve for that in either the direct consequence of the regulation or the downstream consequence of the consumer, in terms of solving for that. So I think that's going to be probably some of the biggest drivers that's there. And last one, which I've been saying for a number of years, since speaking about it back in New York, I think in 2014, is time. The most valuable brands in the future are the ones that give you the most time back.
Well, you just mentioned that with your Apple computer, with this sort of seamless crossover between one device and the other. I mean, that's what they're selling, is time and familiarity. And
I think that's going to be very, very critical. And we're kind of seeing ecosystem information coming out on that. You're going to have the iOS environment where it's able to go and tell you how much you're going and using your device. When I just got my new MacBook, I also had the option of having it be able to go and tell me how much I'm using my Mac, when I'm using it, what programs am I using it for. My Android phone has that feature as well, that I'm able to go and put in and be able to track how much time am I spending on it and what apps and things like that. And again, it's an instigator of being able to go and give time back. And we are in an era as humanity where we are trying to accomplish the most in the same amount of time that was had with the people 100 years ago, as the same amount of time with the people 1,000 years ago. And going back to, imagine if we had gone and said, Edgar, I'm going to come and visit you in Canada and we're going to go and do an hour interview. Or can you come down to Australia and do this, 1 hour thing in person with us? Think of the ratio of time, like easily, round trip, all the other costs, it would have been like 60 hours to 1. And what did we do? I would be shocked if I said we collectively, between the two of us, spent an hour in advance of this in the administration of this call.
Yeah, exactly.
So we just saved 58 hours because of that. And that's just one person.
That should be Zoom's new tagline, I think. Okay, so on that point, obviously you're a branding expert. Really interested to know what books you're reading right now that you can recommend other people, or maybe books you've read in the past which you'd highly recommend people read in conjunction with this interview.
I would say the most impactful fiction book that I've gone and read in the past year and a half is something called Neptune's Brood. It's by Charles Stross. It's a science fiction novel. And it is, as my wife put it, it's the science fiction of accounting. That's how she interpreted it. She read it before me. I devoured it, reading it after. And the best way to go and put it is, what if you extrapolated cryptocurrencies thousands of years into the future? And how is the recognition of value and money? So I kind of read the book, not from necessarily the story, but the implications that were written into it by the author, Charles Stross, into society. And it was riveting because it essentially was what is happening today. And he, by the way, wrote it only a few years after Bitcoin came out.
Okay.
And he went and extrapolated into the future a very possible way. And there's a concept in there which is long money, medium money, and short money. Short money is what we go and do our transaction with, but long money is where the real power resides. And long money takes a very long time to go and convert into medium money, and then from medium to short. So that whole piece is there, and we have our modern equivalents. Like, look, can you go and sell your house tomorrow very easily? The answer is no. Can you go and sell your $10 billion business tomorrow very easily? The answer is no. So we actually have our proxies for long money, medium money, and short money, quite very much so today, and they're changing forms. It went from having cash was your short money to my digital tap is my short money, right? I don't even need to take the time and sorting out and having to go and give you $26.47 for this lunch that I bought. I just tap my phone, and it's going to go and pay for it. So that one I would say is the fiction one. And then I just want to make sure I get my pronunciation. It's a book on all of just the trends that has just gone and happened over the past decades. So things that we kind of perceive around poverty and how much we perceive that there's poverty in the world versus how much poverty there is in reality, how much we believe people are dying. So it's the gap between perceptions and reality. And it's
I can put the link in the comments.
Yeah, it's Hans Rosling. So he's a physician, and he's now passed away, but he wrote this book with his kids. It's called Factfulness. So that would be the book that I would go and recommend to go and read for anybody, especially what is going on in the world today. We are so disconnected with our perceptions from reality, and it goes back to bias. And he went and wrote this book several years ago to just go and say how we've got an inherited bias. And I was at a conference a number of years ago where one of the speakers went and said something that just hit me right into the core of my body, which is said, we live in an era of zombie fact. We go and see something on the news, like, this number of people were affected with this disease, or these people went and suffered in this way financially, or we had this success happen in this part of the world. And then years go by, and we actually treat it as a contemporary fact versus what it was back then. So she called it zombie facts, things that are no longer true, but we relate to it as being the case today. And I think with everything that is going on in the world, you're seeing a lot of people doing the fact finding, right? Like, going and saying how many people are being arrested, or how many people are being charged with things, or people that have been assaulted, and they're actually going and pulling these facts out, and they're actually going and saying, this is what is actually happening in reality versus what we think is happening. And I'm so glad that is going on. And that book will really allow you to get that sense to yourself. And it's also very good at going and conveying visually what the impact of that discrepancy is. And what I really loved about it is you follow the book. As the authors, Hans and his kids, have you go and answer questions for yourself that they went and asked. And you grade yourself. So, it's on the honor system. And you grade yourself in terms of how well you're doing. And, I pride myself on being well-versed. I read a lot. I try and keep as unbiased as possible. I didn't get 100% on any of them. So, I had to go and, eat my own zombie facts as I was going through this. And it was sobering, and it has made me a better business leader, and it has made me a more pragmatic facilitator of conveying information to my clients, and also to the people that I work with in my educational capacity.
That's great. I'm definitely going to read that then. I've never heard of it, so that's great. What about websites? Is there like a guilty pleasure that you have, or something from an intellectual perspective that you always consume or use?
Twitter.
What, for arguing leftist political arguments?
No, I for a number of years I didn't really know how to use Twitter very well, and then I think it kind of nailed it on me, where I went and just started going and having people in my feed who knew way more about their subject matter that was interesting to me than I would ever be able to go and learn for myself.
Yeah.
So I just started adding those people in across the spectrum. And then I also went and started adding people who really talked about subjects where I felt I had a very strong attachment to it, whether it was politics or whether it was a sociology or whatever the heck it is.
What are the top three
Where
at the top of your head
most,
then?
in terms of who to follow,
Yeah.
okay. One of my favorite ones to follow right now is at Naval, Nadal, at Balaji S. He's the one who really went and just brought a lot of facts and information to go and take a look at around the whole pandemic situation very early in January, and he's just unpacked a lot. And following him and who he has gone and interacted with has opened up a lot. And then I think one of my favorite kind of like early ones in this whole thing is at SHL, Sahil Lavinia. He's the founder of Gumroad. It was a venture funded startup that blew up, and he went and worked hard and paid everybody's money back and kept the business going. And then he shares everything about it. Every quarter he goes and publishes the financial statements of a company that is privately held and goes and shows what's happening. And it's like, that takes some guts.
Yeah.
Like that really is a comfort. And I've actually learned a lot from him and how to go and build my business. And so I would say those three have either opened something up that's had me think differently, have me critique myself, or have just facilitated a catalyst of kind of a network effect through Twitter where I've gone and managed to learn from a lot of other people that were like one hop or two hops away from them.
No, that's great. I mean, you mentioned one of those to me before, and that's who I follow, and I found him really good. So, what about a piece of tech you can't do without? Is it the MacBook?
If I had to like really call myself out on it, it's the touchpad on the MacBook. I just struggle with, like, I haven't had to use a mouse in 7 years. Ever since I switched to Mac, I just haven't needed to, unless I'm using a PC. I still have my PC, but I took it out 8 months ago because I wanted to go and take some music that I had produced that I had left on there. Like, I don't have a vested interest in going into that. So I would say it's that, and I think it just facilitates a lot. I'm just really amazed in just the ecosystem that have become available and kind of like catered to me. So I've really kind of customized the apps that I go and interact with inside there as well, in terms of how do I go and leave notes for myself for the future, or how do I go and brainstorm, or how do I go and capture communiques to go and give to other people. So the fact that it facilitates that so seamlessly and it's intuitive is very helpful for me.
That's interesting. Okay. What about, this is your time to sort of promote yourself or what you're working on, anything. What do you want to tell the listeners if they're interested in what you had to say today? So
I got to just really put a shout out to some of the members of our team at Avasta who, especially Fan Nguyen, who's a former student, then became an intern, then became an employee, and now she's like instrumental in developing our guide to the ISO standard. It initially started as actually a 15-page document in prose form that was requested by a prospect to understand how could they go and convey that idea inside their organization. And what it has turned into, we're going to be launching it publicly next month, is an instruction manual for how to implement the ISO standard for somebody at the single brand level, from soup to nuts, including some basic foundations of measurement. And we go give the full freedom for people to go and make things more sophisticated because they have the resources or they have their personal know-how. But somebody who is call it a business owner, like you have a restaurant and you're wanting to figure out if I should go and expand the restaurant, or you're a brand manager and you're responsible for your geography or for your customer group and you want to be able to become better at it, that instruction set is there to be able to follow that standard, gain the benefits from it. And the part that I'm most proud of is that you don't need to talk to any of us to be able to take advantage of it. And we've had over 40 individuals over the past 9 months review it, give feedback, constructive criticism, copy editing, designing it. And I'm just very excited to go and make it publicly available. And hopefully it just creates a life of its own as people are able to gain the benefits of that wisdom. Right. Part of it from me professionally, what I teach, but then also really a lot of it is just from the great questions that have been posed back to us at the development team as to, well, why are you saying this? Or what's another way that you could go and say this? So I love the fact that it was created by a community. But by the end of it, I've played a very small part.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I'm sure you can claim credit. That's your own personal brand, right? Remember?
Technically, I am, but I make sure that everybody who contributed to it material is getting their due for sure, and I acknowledge that there needs to be some kind of a focal point, and if it happens to be me right now, so be it. But I'm hoping that in months or years' time, that becomes less and less important.
Sure. Hey, so we met on LinkedIn. Say someone's listening to this episode, they want to get in touch with you, something that we said or you said sparked interest. What's the best way for them to get into contact with you?
I am most responsive on Twitter and on LinkedIn, and you are absolutely welcome to email us at Avasta if you're interested in what we go and do commercially, or if you want to kind of get exposed to bits of the brand evaluation guide early. So that's very easy. It's discover@avasta.co. So I presume you're going to go and
I'll put the links on the article as well.
Yeah. So that would be the one of three different ways. You have your email, you have your professional social media on LinkedIn, and you go and get your chaos of Twitter, and you're able to go and get your access in through any of those.
Oh, great. Well, look, Edgar, that's a wrap. So thank you very much for your time. I'm sure anyone who's interested in branding will at least answer some maybe niggling questions that they've always wanted to ask someone who's at arguably the forefront of brand strategy and brand valuation. So thanks again for your time.
Thank you. It has been a real pleasure.